Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. Before turning it over to Doug Ute, the Executive Director of the Ohio High School Athletic Association, I did want to go over a few housekeeping items for our presentation this morning. This presentation is being recorded and will ultimately be posted here by the end of the week to our YouTube channel. We will be getting a link out to that presentation sometime next week, give or take, within one of our memos that we do send out. For folks who do want to provide questions to us, we will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation. There is a Q&A function in which you can place those questions. We do ask that you provide your first and last name, the position in which you are currently, and the school with which you are associated. As those questions come in, we will either answer them through chat or we will answer them live through audio. So thank you again for joining, and I will throw it over to Doug for a brief introduction.
Thank you, Ronald, and I'll start this morning by thanking everybody for joining, and also on a morning like today, when you've got delays and snow hitting at 4 a.m. and cold temperatures, we hope that everybody's safe and your staff and your students and your community are safe back home. And I know from being in that position for 20 years of calling school delays, it's a very tough decision. And so we thank you for what you do and keeping your kids safe. So we want to have a conversation today about divisional alignment. And, let me share this with you. This is about a 20-year conversation we've had here with our member schools. And so it's important that we mentioned this is a member-driven initiative that we took on here. And really, in my fourth year here as the executive director, I get asked frequently about this and from member schools. And so we wanted to take that conversation on with the board. And we started that in June to say, either we're going to do something about this and do what's best for kids, if we feel that that's what needs to be done, or we're going to say we're going to stick at 4 divisions. So we've had that conversation. I appreciate all of our board members who are on today, and I appreciate that conversation since June moving forward. And I would share with you that we did not identify one school at all during this process. So we didn't look at any schools individually on how that would affect. We only looked at numbers, and it's been a very good process. And I thank our board and all of you who have given us input throughout this process. And I would reiterate that no decision has been made. There's been no board approval. And so, we will also do this meeting. It's taped because I know how it gets in buildings when you have it on your calendar. The buses roll in, kids get off the bus, and before long it's after lunch, and you don't know what hit you. And so we wanted to tape this and so that our administrators can view this at any time moving forward. So one of the things that I mentioned before is this whole process is what's best for kids and putting them in a competitive situation that in a tournament that they have an opportunity to win a game against similar sized schools. And I think it's important to note as we talk about this, for schools who have addressed the situation, it's not about winning a state championship. It's about putting their kids in a position that they can win a couple games or have an opportunity to win a few games in a tournament. This is not about one sport. We are talking about our competitive balance sports right now because they are very similar. So baseball, softball, volleyball, basketball have very similar numbers. Soccer obviously is a little bit lower than that. But I want to make it clear that the board has had a lot of discussions about individual sports, but the individual sports are a little bit more unique, so need addressed individually. And the board has had these conversations, and we intend to move forward with those conversations. And so if you're asking about why didn't we address track or something like that, we have had conversations, and we will continue to have those conversations in here. But the uniqueness of individual sports just kind of put that on a side conversation right now. As I mentioned before, we want to address the disparity. Anything we would do has to address the disparity in Division I. And, we have sports that a school with 346 athletes can compete against somebody with 1,200 athletes. And so the question then that we keep asking ourselves is, would you put your school in that same league that you're competing in a tournament with in terms of number of students you're competing against. We don't have that in all of our tournaments right now. As you know, a lot of schools around Ohio have changed leagues because of population shifting in counties or neighboring counties, those type of things, and change leagues to put your kids in a more competitive situation. So also from a tournament, and I mentioned before that what's best for kids, and then it's our job to figure out logistically how to do that. And so this is not anything that creates additional or less revenue for us. It's the same amount of games. And so it's not something that we're doing to create revenue here in our office, as I mentioned before, because it's the same amount of games. And so our next steps here in this meeting, Bob Goldrick is here, and Bob is going to address the history of divisional alignment in Ohio. Over the years, we've also had a lot of conversations with other states to see what do other states do. And then Ronald will address in his presentation a little bit about some various conversations we've had and the options that we've looked at to address this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
All right, thank you, Doug. As Doug talked about a little bit here, I'm going to mention the history or historical perspective of our tournament divisions in the competitive island sports. Also briefly talk about other discussions we've had with other states or some of the reviews we've had and things of that sort. So the first slide you're looking at is the sport of football. Football, to be clear, is not a sport we're looking at of making any changes at this point, but we did want to show you historically what football has looked like over the years. Obviously, we started out in 1972 with 3 classes, 4 qualifiers per class into the tournament, so just 12 total schools made the tournament. And without going through the growth of the football tournament, you can see that now we're up to 7 divisions with 16 qualifiers per region. So that makes 448 total qualifiers. Quite a significant change in the sport of football since the beginning of the tournament process. We've been asked over time, why does football have 7 divisions and some of our bigger team sports only have 4? And I think there's a variety of answers to that. Number one, I would say over time, the board has taken a lot of feedback from the Coaches Association about expansion and move forward based on that feedback from the coaches. Football over time obviously has been different than the other sports in that we've had a limited number of qualifiers to the tournaments, whereby in our other sports, everybody has a chance to enter our tournaments. And then back in older days, if you will, the physicality of the sport has been brought up with the size, speed, two-way players, and so on and so forth, with a lot of differences between the bigger schools and the smaller schools in that regard. And I think that has influenced the board over time to expand the football playoffs. And moving ahead to some of our other sports, the next slide shows girls volleyball, boys soccer, and girls soccer. Following that, you will see the 2 basketballs, boys and girls, and then baseball and softball. And we really have not changed much over the years when, you know, you look at the crux of things. A lot of our sports started out with 2 classes back in the day, or 3 classes. And then it's been since the late 80s or early 90s that we have gone to 4 divisions. So quite frankly, that's been a long time since we've made many changes in a lot of our team sports. Doug kind of alluded to this, but the number of tournament divisions is a sport regulation. So that means the board of directors can determine how many divisions there are based on the number of schools that field a team. And I think you're obviously aware that the board has made exceptions to that regulation over the years. Football obviously has more divisions than 4. Lacrosse and boys volleyball have more divisions than what the tournament regulations say. So the board has made exceptions. Those have either been or are emerging sports. So that's part of the reason why those exceptions were granted. And then on the opposite end of thing, the sport of boys wrestling, there's been some years where they really have not qualified to have 3 divisions, but the board has continued to allow that to happen. Looking at some past board action, on the next slide, you can see that in June of 2006, the board actually did approve a recommendation that did touch on the disparity in Division I. And like the sport of football is now, approval was given for some of our other sports having the top 10% of given, or top 10% of schools in Division I for those sports, with the other divisions divided with a different percentage per division. So that's shown there. But then, based on feedback that the association received from the membership, not too much longer than that, in January of 2007, the board rescinded that proposal. In April of 2012, the board did approve a recommendation to expand football to 7 divisions, and with that, they allowed Division I to be smaller and have the top 10% of schools only in Division I, with the others 6 divisions divided evenly. And then in October of 2019, some of you may have been involved in this, but the OHSAA did have a 4-division committee to address the enrollment disparity for schools from the top to the bottom of Division I. And you can see there what that proposal was, again, making Division I smaller than the other sport, or the other divisions, I should say, and that proposal was tabled. In terms of recent discussions, as Doug mentioned, pretty much from day one since he has been the executive director, he's had administrators and coaches raise the issue of, why can't we have more divisions, but probably even more than that, why can't we address that disparity in Division I, from the top enrollment to the bottom in Division I? We have, since we have gotten into this discussion with the board, the state basketball coaches even submitted a proposal on expanded divisions to the executive director. In September of 2022, we actually did have a meeting in this office with staff members, a number of school administrators, executives from some of the state educational service organizations, like the school boards of principals. A lot of those administrators came from our board, but we did talk about making some changes to our tournaments, and the feedback was really positive that something should be done. No formal action came out of that meeting, but again, it seemed to be pretty positive, and people felt that, yeah, it's time to make some changes. In December of 2022, the staff was invited, and a lot of us went to Southwest Ohio to meet with a lot of the athletic administrators from the schools that are in the bottom of Division I. And really the overriding message was, we just want a legitimate chance to win 1 or 2 tournament games. They aren't necessarily interested in, the best path or the easier path to win a state championship, but they just felt that that enrollment disparity even kept them and discouraged their players and their coaches from even a chance of winning a tournament game or 2. So that message was well received by our office. As Doug mentioned, back in June of this year, or actually this school year, we met with the board of directors and did begin, I guess you could say, formal discussion on changes. And then obviously you as a administrator of school did receive a memo in December of 23 talking about that we are seriously studying tournament division expansion in 7 sports. We have had, as Doug mentioned, some reviews with some other states and got into some discussions with them. We looked at, I guess, looking at the middle of that slide, some of the other formats we discussed. We looked at Indiana, which has a 2-year success factor, which I guess you could say would replace competitive balance in Ohio if we would ever change. They've also gone to an unequal number of schools in their 4 division tournaments. We looked at Florida, which has a unique setup in the sport of football, where they have 4 metro divisions, 4 suburban divisions, and 1 rural division. We talked to California, and they have a open division, whereby in a sport like basketball, they pick the top 32 teams regardless of division, and have a committee that look at head-to-head records, strength of schedule, state and regional rankings, and place those teams in the so-called open division. So they're the best of the best, the top 32 teams in that division. And there are some other states like Arizona that have also adopted that in some limited sports. So again, we've talked and looked at a lot of different other states to see what they're doing. In looking at some of our other states that are out there, I think it's fair to say that in the Midwest, there's a lot of states that are very similar to Ohio. One thing that became apparent that I'm not sure all of us were aware of, but a lot of states limit the number of schools that even are permitted to enter their tournaments, similar to what we do in Ohio for the sport of football. And then I think lastly, this would be probably of the most interest to the membership. Put together a chart that shows a lot of other states in the country and how Ohio compares to them in terms of the number of tournament divisions. So those states are listed to the left. Obviously, Ohio's at the top. We show the number of member schools in that first column after the state name. And then we look at our 8 competitive balance sports. The first number shows the number of schools within that state that play that sport or participate in their tournament. And then the second number after the slash shows the number of tournament divisions. So obviously, a good percent of these states are smaller than Ohio. But I think it's fair to say that we are behind what a lot of other states are doing in terms of number of tournament divisions. As you can see, particularly in some of the southern states, they have a vast number more tournament divisions. And even some of the states that are similar to Ohio, like New York and Pennsylvania, have more tournament divisions in some of their sports. So hopefully that is good information for you, showing a little bit of the history and some of the discussions we've had and comparisons with Ohio and some of the other sports. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ronald.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. The first portion of my presentation is going to touch a little bit on what Bob has already touched on with our current governing regulations and also how those things are changed. So the first one is OHSAA Bylaw 2, which talks about the collection of EMIS data, indicates that schools may only compete in the division to which they are assigned. And it also discussed the competitive balance initiative that we've been working with for the past several years. The second regulation that is in play here is OHSAA General Sports Regulation 17.1, which is what Bob had alluded to. It states that tournaments will be conducted in divisions based on the number of teams from last year or 2 years ago for those non-competitive balance sports. And it also outlines the minimum number of individuals that constitute a team in those individual sports. At the bottom of this slide, you can see the chart that is utilized to determine the number of divisions for any given sport. But as Bob had mentioned, there are several exceptions to this, one being football, as well as wrestling and a couple of our other emerging sports that have come on as of late. Now, how those things get changed, or I'm sorry, I'll back up. General Sports Regulation 17.2 also talks about after any number of divisions is determined, those schools must be placed evenly within those divisions. But football is currently the only exception that exists within 17.2. So in football, as you know, Division I has the top 10% of schools, with the remaining 6 divisions divided evenly with the remaining schools that competed in the tournament during the previous year. Now, again, the question is, how do these current governing regulations get changed? Changing a bylaw has to go through a referendum vote. That means it has to go to the membership and be approved by a simple majority of votes cast. So if 800 votes are cast, 401 must affirm the referendum in order for it to go into effect. That vote does take place between May 1 and May 15th of every single year. Changing sport regulations, those are done by the board of directors through recommendations made by the executive director's office. The board votes to approve these during regular scheduled meetings or any specialty meeting that may come about. So as we went through this process, and Doug and Bob talked a lot about when this all started and how we worked through this with all of our stakeholders, we had a plethora of options that were presented to our board of directors for review during which they talked through, the pros and cons of each and whether or not they actually fixed the discrepancies and the issues that we set out to address at this time. So I'm not going to go into the crux of each option, meaning I'm not going to give you the number of teams in each division or those lines or anything like that. But just for your knowledge, we did talk about 4 divisions, which is where we currently are at with the majority of these competitive balance sports. We talked about 5 divisions, 6 divisions, all divided divided evenly amongst the teams. And then we looked at 6 divisions with a smaller Division I, 6 divisions with a smaller Division I, and a smaller Division 6, meaning the last division is also smaller than the remaining divisions. We looked at 6 divisions with a small Division I and a small Division II, and then the remaining 4 are divided evenly. And then we bumped that up even more to look like football, to where we have 7 divisions that are divided equally, and then 7 divisions with a small Division I, which mirrors that of football completely. So again, we went through this in a very tedious fashion, in that the board was provided with dividing lines for generalities, meaning all of the schools, as well as the sport-specific information for each school. The one thing that Doug did talk about that I want to stress is our board nor our office looked at a list of schools that would be placed in any given division at any given time. So we were not attempting to pinpoint specific schools and ensure that they are either placed in a higher division or that they go into a lower division. The whole point was to ensure that, one, we were addressing the Division I discrepancy, as well as ensuring that the number of teams in any given division is very similar to a conference that you might join in your area of the state. So after we worked through all of these options, there was a board meeting a couple of months ago or a board work session where we sat there and we started throwing numbers out at each other and looking at different options. And where we ultimately, or I'm sorry, let me back up. We had a couple additional options. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Bob talked about it a little bit as well, California Open Division. We discussed this a little bit about placing teams into an open division based on a couple of factors, including their performance, as well as their history of success, their current records and RPI ratings, and those schools will be placed there without any regard to what their normal division is or what they would have been assigned at the beginning of the school year. Additionally, again, as Bob mentioned, the Indiana success factor model with uneven divisions, and then one that we continue to discuss is an option, or to provide an option to our schools to move up a division or move up to the top division in their respective sport. So that is one thing that we do continue to discuss, and it may be something that comes about through a referendum item, but that is not the sole option that we have in front of us right now. But again, the current proposal, this came about during a board work session in which we had all these options laid out in front of us, and we started talking about different things and what each of these options may create other disparities and other discrepancies. So we spent probably 2.5 hours or so, give or take, just throwing numbers at one another and saying, well, what does it look like when we do this? And what does it look like when we do this? And ultimately where we currently have landed is in the sport of baseball, basketball, softball, and volleyball. There would be 7 divisions in total, with Division I having the top 64 schools based on enrollment counts, including the competitive balance number. Division II having the next 64 schools based on enrollment counts, including the competitive balance number. And Divisions 3 through 7 being divided evenly based on counts, including their competitive balance number. In the sport of soccer, we would see an increase to 5 divisions total, with, again, Division I and Division II having 64 teams each, with Division I having the top 64, Division II having the next 64. And then Divisions 3 through 5 being divided evenly based on enrollments, including the competitive balance number. So the current proposal and an example breakdown that we have here, and again, I want to stress this is an example breakdown. You can see that in Division I, you would be talking about a range of 638 student athletes and up, being 64 teams. Division II having 457 to 637 student athletes. And then Division III being 281 to 456. Division IV being 193 to 280. Division V being 143 to 192. Division VI being 99 to 142. And Division VII being 98 or less student athletes. Additionally, on the right-hand side, you can see the number of teams in each of those divisions. So the first two are 64 and 64. Division III, 4 have 134. Division V is 132. Division VI is 135, and Division VII is 136. And those numbers are going to fluctuate. They're not going to be completely even simply because of the grouping of schools at a specific enrollment count that we may have on any given year. At the bottom of this slide, you can see what the representation throughout the state would look like in each of these divisions. So you can see the Central would have 23 teams in Division I, Northeast 16 in Division I, Northwest 3 in Division I, Southwest 22 in Division I, and then East and Southeast would not have any in Division I. And then you can see those numbers the whole way through. So again, I'll give everybody a little bit of time to kind of take this in, and Bob, Doug, anything that you wanted to add here, or any board members want to add at this point.
Ronald, before one of the board members jump in, I think I would just say, as Ronald shows you the breakdown in divisions, and so right now I believe we're in each division about 178 schools, somewhere in that neighborhood, and a 4-division model. So that gives you an example of what that would drop to. And then I think I would note within that, if you just look at the range on there, it certainly looks like some place that you would put your school in that league. And I want to reemphasize that. Would you play in that league? The same would you play in the tournament? And I'll ask any board members to share at this time that want to share anything.
Hi, it's Andy Bixler. Sorry, I bounced off at the beginning of the presentation for a minute. We had bus troubles after starting on a 2-hour delay, and actually closed school at the beginning of this call. So if I do say anything that's repetitive, I apologize. I just want to go back through something Ronald touched on with the 64 and 64 at the beginning, and after the board and staff reviewing a number of different ideas, this 64 teams in the top 2 divisions really seem to address the D1 disparity part of that the group was looking at. Not even considering like the extremes, like the absolute largest school, or from a D7 perspective, the absolute smallest school, but looking at the number of enrollment counts that clustered around the middle of that range, and that seemed to really put those bigger schools, those larger schools, into groupings where they're similar in the the schools that they're going to match up against in the tournament. I think that that was a key turning point in as we were reviewing these different ideas in really addressing that D1 disparity.
Good morning, Jay Selgo here, representing Northwest Ohio, and I think I want to first of all commend Ronald and my colleagues on the board that have went through these discussions over the past times. We would throw numbers at Ronald or different scenarios, and within a few minutes he would plug in the data and we would see that. And so I do want to stress that as we reviewed these different proposals and had these discussions, for me personally, the data was the most important. Trying to figure out what data made sense. And I also want to emphasize what's been said by others is, for me personally and for the other board members, we did not look at where our individual schools would fall, and we did not look at where other specific schools would fall. We were simply looking at information and data that was presented to us. And as Doug said, we did not discuss a financial impact of this. We simply went forward with a discussion of what do we feel is best based on some of these discrepancies that we've seen. And the third one I think that I think is important to mention is, obviously there will be a domino effect of this in perhaps other sports or specifically tournament structure, and those were not something we looked at. I think since I've been on these discussions for almost 12 years, back to the after football with the 4 division committee, a lot of those conversations get quelled or squashed because of changes that may come, and it just gets scary. So we went in simply looking at the data, and then our goal was to address the other domino effects that come after. As you can see from the data Ronald has on the board down there, Northwest Ohio is one of the larger schools in terms of small schools. And one of my biases going into this process from the decade discussion that we've had was that there does exist a discrepancy in Division I, but there's also a discrepancy in Division I if you're looking at, Division IV, if you're looking at ratios and how the smallest school to the biggest school. So when going through this process, we looked at how we really kind of separated that data is we tried to take some of the outliers out. So we looked at math terms such as the ratio, the average enrollment, and what I specifically did was I pulled out those outliers and then I looked at the different ratios. And so as we went through these different models, we looked at how those numbers changed, trying to get as consistent of a ratio of the schools making up that division from bottom to top. And while there is a discrepancy in Division IV and there's also a discrepancy in Division I, they are simply different. There are in Division IV, you might have a small number of outliers, but you see, as Andy pointed out, a large cluster of schools in the middle, around the 100 mark. So when you break down to the median of the divisions, you get numbers that for Division IV that do not simply look like what Division I. And so as we went through these ratios with Division I, Division II scenarios, and how many teams go in each one, the goal for me, and I think our discussions were led by what does the data say, not necessarily just picking arbitrary numbers, which has come up when we picked 10%. How did 10% get picked up? But we kind of tried to match those numbers that we felt each division had a competitive was a competitive nature from the small schools to the larger schools in terms of if you're entering a tournament, you have a chance for success. And I think that was one of the founding principles of our discussions to try to give all schools an opportunity of success.
Hi, this is Gina Franks from the East District. And I think just to highlight something that Jay said, I think that addition of the data and the numbers is a new component to this discussion. This discussion has been happening for a long time. And for a long time, a lot of people have known that we need to do something. But having those numbers and having that data and really focusing on just what the discrepancy is has really, having that lead our discussion, I think, is the difference this time as we really dug down and looked at ways we could level the playing field.
Well, all of you for taking the time to kind of explain the rationale, one from board perspective, but two from your district's perspective. I think it's extremely helpful to keep those conversations going. In looking at kind of what our next steps are, those discussions are going to continue. I'm going to ask Bob real quick to talk about, our dates and possible locations for a small little roadshow that will be put on by our office discussing this option, this process, and so on. So go ahead, Bob.
Well, thanks, Ronald. We will be sending a memo later today with this information, so you're getting the first dibs on this. But yeah, we'll be going out to 6 locations later this month and early in February to answer any questions personally that you have on expanded tournament divisions. Monday, January 29th will be the first one at the Quest Conference Center in Westerville in suburban Columbus. All of these will be from 10 o'clock to noon, other than one that I mentioned coming up. Tuesday, January 30th, also from 10 to noon, will be at Cincinnati Princeton High School in their auditorium. Friday, February 2nd, also 10 to noon at Findlay High School in their auditorium. Monday, February 5th from 11 to 1, that time's the one that's different, at Streetsboro High School in their auditorium. Wednesday, February 7th from 10 to noon at the Pritchard Laughlin Civic Center in Cambridge. And then lastly, on Friday, February 9th, again, 10 to noon at Logan High School. So those are the 6 sites and dates and times will be available to answer any questions in person. And please keep in mind that we will have our usual spring meetings to talk about proposed referendum issues. That schedule will be announced later this winter, and that'll be obviously different than these meetings strictly for expanded tournament divisions.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. So Bob had talked about all of those dates, and you notice that a lot of them are taking place in between the end of this month in January through February 9th. I think you said, right? So this would all culminate into potential action by our board of directors in February of 2024. The current date for that meeting is February the 15th. So again, we plan to take in all of this information and all of these discussions that we have around the states and look to round out and finalize a proposal that would be presented to the board for possible ratification in February. Additionally, we've already begun these types of discussions within our office with our stakeholders around the states and our district athletic boards about how we're formatting tournaments with any types of changes. So we've looked at different maps and making sure that teams are going to be able to compete, still with those schools in their similar districts, as well as what it looks like on the Division I and Division II levels. So those are ongoing, and we're going to continue to have our DAB members, in the office, as well as possibly us, going their way to help out with formatting those types of items. So at this point, I do want to move on to a couple of the questions that we had. Anything else you want to add before we move over to questions and all that good stuff?
No, I think we've covered everything that we wanted to cover. So
perfect. So the first question that we had was about non-competitive balanced team sports and what the outlook is on those, and will we be addressing those either right now or in the future? Those non-competitive balanced sports obviously being field hockey, ice hockey, boys volleyball, and boys and girls lacrosse. And I might be missing one or two, but those are off the top of my head what I can think of right now.
yeah, I would step in and just say that we have 28 sports, and we'll have a discussion about all 28 sports if through their coaches association. And when we look at the numbers, and we fully intend to have those discussions with our coaches associations and our schools about each sport.
Next question that we had, or I'm going to combine two questions that we've had come in, and what does this kind of do to competitive balance And, are we going to be adjusting competitive balance formulas? Are we going to be eliminating competitive balance formulas? And right now, the plan is to not make any adjustments to the competitive balance initiative as it currently exists. However, I think as you've seen since really the inception of competitive balance, is that is an extremely fluid process and something that we take in a lot of information from our member schools, from a lot of different stakeholders around the state regarding the competitive balance process. And we'll continue to monitor that as we go throughout and make any adjustments. And if we feel that things need to change with competitive balance, we'll continue to convene the competitive balance committee that we have and make any adjustments that that committee possibly deems appropriate, as well as what the board would deem appropriate as well. It should also be noted that any changes to a competitive balance structure must be done through schools, through referendum. So that does have to be voted on by a majority of the member schools and a majority of the votes cast in that. So again, long story short, we continue to review competitive balance regardless of whether or not we make adjustments to the number of divisions in the state. And if changes are deemed necessary or something that the membership wants, we will present those to the membership for vote.
Ronald, I may add, if you will, if you remember back in, seems like years and years ago when competitive balance discussion first came up, the concern seemed to be the number of championships being won by non-public schools. And that number pretty much held steady no matter what sports you looked at and what period you looked at around 44%. And even though competitive balance formula was not set up strictly to look at championships and who was winning, I did do some research over the weekend and included this current fall sports season with our competitive balance sports. And that 44% number has dropped to 33% since competitive balance began in the 2017-18 school year. Obviously, for our fall sports, that's 7 years of data that's been compiled. For our winter and spring sports, that's only 5 years when you consider that we lost a year due to COVID, and obviously the 24 winter and spring sports have not occurred yet. But again, that number, looking at strictly at championships by non-public schools, has dropped from 44% to 33%. And if you recall, non-public schools make up roughly 16% of the OHSAA membership. So as Ron mentioned, we really haven't had any pushback that I'm aware of from the membership wanting to disband competitive balance. Overall, I think we can say that it has been an effective tool for us to make at least some differences in our tournaments.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. Doug, can you talk a little bit about the individual sports as well, and kind of just reiterate kind of what you had talked about in the beginning, and really the main question is, why not rip the Band-Aid off now as opposed to holding on as we go through?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, this was a full plate conversation with the competitive balance sports that we've had, but we've also had a lot of conversation about the individual sports. So just because we're coming out of the gate, so to speak, with these sports doesn't mean something wouldn't happen on the same timeline as the team sports, the competitive balance sports. And so I can assure you that conversations have happened, and we will continue to have those conversations. But this was just a conversation that we had about competitive balance, that we thought we need to stick to just competitive balance on the front burner of the stove. And so we'll be moving others up that way as well.
Perfect. Doug, can you also talk about a little bit of the structure with state tournaments for those 7 division sports now as well?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it's just like we all do. We're all in this for kids, and you make decisions at your local school level. It's best for kids, and then it's up to, the administration to figure out the logistics. And we are looking at this the same way. As you know, or probably know, that you've elected a lot of really good folks to the district athletic boards, and they are charged with, setting those tournaments in place at the local level. And so, those conversations have occurred, and if the board passes a motion to move forward with this, that will happen very quickly in terms of the conversations. And so, the days of going to a state tournament and watching all of the state semifinals and all the finals, that would be impossible under a 7-division model. And I'm a traditionalist, and I share all the time. I've went to every state tournament since 1977. But again, it's not about Doug Ute and watching 12 games. It's about the kids and what's fair to them. So logistically, that's our charge to figure it out. And we've already solved that, because we already do that with soccer right now. We do it in football, where we just have a state finals weekend. And in soccer, we play our state semifinals out around the state. And that's what this model would look like. We've already had conversations with some of our venues that host our state tournaments on how that would happen. And it's just merely then a conversation of going out around the state with folks that host our regional games and finding places for our state semifinal games as well.
So in the Q&A, we're getting a lot of questions on, soccer and 5 divisions, and I'll apologize in advance for not having a 5-division breakdown, kind of similar to what we had on 7, but I did pull it up. Unfortunately, I don't have it on the presentation, but I will kind of read that off. So just kind of ears open, and if you have these questions about 5 divisions, feel free to kind of jot some of these numbers down. And again, this is what the tentative proposal would look like. This is not a final number for either boys or girls soccer or any other 5-division sport. So again, please keep that in mind. So Division 1 would have 639 students and more. Division 2 would have 451 to 638. Division 3 would have 256 to 450. Division 4 would have 162 to 255. And Division 5 would be 161 and lower. And I know we also have the question about why does soccer possibly have 5 divisions as opposed to 7? And the reason being is because of the number of teams that compete in the sport throughout the state. Those other competitive balance sports, so you're talking your footballs, basketballs, girls volleyball, baseball, and softball, those have anywhere from the mid 700s to 800 schools or so participating in that sports and participating in our tournament in any given year. Boys and girls soccer, however, hover around the mid 500 mark. So 550, 560 or so schools that compete in the tournament in any given year. That's why there's a difference there for those sports specifically. One other question that I'll also go ahead and answer before.
Yes, can we add to that? And so one of the things is, we want to set a procedure in place here that, with a chart that would state in each division, if you have, given an example with basketball and volleyball, if you have, basketball has over 790 teams that enter the tournament, to set that chart to say if you have X amount of teams enter the tournament, you'll have 7 divisions. If you have X amount, you would have 6. And if you have an amount, you would have 5. And the board's working on that chart now. And so as we gather the stats, so that would be set in place for future conversations.
Yeah, thanks for that clarity, Doug. And just going back as well, so that you can see kind of what that looks like. If I can get to the slide itself, sorry, backwards. So that chart will look very similar to what's at the bottom here. So again, number of teams that competed in that sport in any given year, whether that be the previous year or the previous 2 years, depending on if it's competitive balance sport or not, and then the number of divisions that correlate with that number of teams. So that does currently exist. within the handbook, and again, that's in 17.1. There are a couple of exceptions that, like we talked about earlier, but something similar would be developed if these adjustments were to be made. One other question that I'll reference as well is somebody had asked about how there are not more games when you add divisions. So the math that you kind of have to do when trying to figure out the total number of games that we have in any given tournament, you take the full number of schools participating in a tournament. So let's say it's 800 for any given sport, and then you figure out the number of champions that you will have at the end of that. And you take 800, and right now it's at 4. So 800 minus 4 is 796. That's the total number of games that you need in order to get to those 4 champions. If you increase the divisions, it would go 800 minus 7, which takes it down to 893 games. 793 games that would be needed in order to reach those 7 total champions. So we would actually have a few less games in some of those tournaments than we do now. Would there be more championship games? Sure, but in total, there would not be more games than what we have currently. Doug, I'm going to throw one question to you. Maybe it's an elephant in the room question. Public versus private. Why is that something that isn't discussed or isn't being considered? And talk about the history of that and what that looks like from the office as well as from the state, frankly.
I think that was the birth of competitive balance. When we had those discussions to keep the same, and not add a separation between private and public. And I think that goes back now, at least a dozen years in terms of discussion, and then at least 8 or so, if not more, of instituting a competitive balance. And as I think Bob alluded to earlier, it has made a difference. But I would also share this with you. Certainly, it's just like when we look at 7 divisions. If you're going to wait for everybody, 100% of the people to agree with you, you're never going to get anything done. Not everybody in Ohio agrees with private and public playing in the same divisions, but there are a lot more people that want that to happen than not. We haven't had a push from lawmakers. We haven't really had a push from schools. And so I think I saw one stat that prior to competitive balance, 43% of our state tournaments were won by private schools. And after competitive balance was instituted, I think we're down below 33%. So, and it's not put in to make sure privates don't win competitive balance. It's or championships. That's just put in for an equal playing field, so to speak, that way. So there's not really a push from others to make the separation happen.
Perfect. I have one individual just asking for the previous state comparison as well, just to kind of reiterate this. And Bob, do you want to talk about real quickly just how these numbers were gathered and any other takeaways that you might have had there?
As Bob's gathered this thing, Ronald, I'll throw this in here too, is because it's so hard to compare us with other states, because we are the 3rd largest, and that one of the things that we wanted to focus on is how many schools are in each division. So that way you can compare Alabama, who has 413 schools, and if you look over at basketball and baseball, softball, where they have 7 divisions, obviously that's going to put a lot less schools in a division to compete for a state championship there. So that was important from us to go to 178 down to 130. Obviously, you have a better chance to win that state tournament. But that's how, if you look at the number of schools that enter their tournament in there, that's a fair way, I think, to compare us to the other states.
Yeah, I did do a survey with the top 20 states in terms of participation numbers, and then soon after that, Doug received something from another state association in which they did a lot of the legwork as well and came up with actually our 8 competitive balance sports on these numbers that you see in front of you. So what I did here was actually just pull out some examples 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 other states. And again, as I mentioned before, a good majority of those are smaller than Ohio. But you can see running through real quickly, like football, we have 7 tournament divisions. The smallest of this bunch is 5 from New York, 6 Pennsylvania, 6 Virginia, 6 Washington. But these other states have 7 or more. If you look at girls volleyball, we have 4 divisions, but some of these states have 5, 6, 7, and even 8 tournament divisions. Soccer, for both boys and girls, we have 3. We happen to be of this group the smallest. A lot of these states have 4, 5, 6, and one of them, Georgia, has 8. Basketball, we have 4. That's tied for the lowest, along with Massachusetts and Minnesota. And as you can see from this group, a lot more tournament divisions than Ohio has. And then baseball and softball are very similar. I think Wisconsin is an outlier with baseball. They only have 1 tournament division. I know the University of Wisconsin itself does not even offer the sport of baseball, but then they have 5 in softball, which is more than Ohio has. So again, just wanted to do a representation to our schools to show that we've had not only the same number of divisions in our tournaments for a number of years, but quite frankly, we seem to be behind what a lot of other states are doing. And as Doug mentioned, we went into this exercise deciding we want to do what's best for kids, and that's why the discussion overall is happening, expanding our tournament divisions.
Awesome, thanks, Bob. Appreciate you going through that again. We'll go with one last question here because we only have one other one kind of pending. Can you talk a little bit about Division I versus Division II only have 64, but those other divisions might have a little bit or a few more schools in it, obviously. And what does that do, and what's the opportunities that's being provided to kids in D3 through D7 and D3 through D5?
Yeah, I think when we talk about this, we have to have something that addresses the disparity. And so currently, if you have 346 students, you could be competing against somebody with 1,200, or there are 21 schools with more than 681 schools, or students in their school that would be accredited up top. And so when you look at Division I and II, and now you can say, well, they have a 1 in 64 chance. They do, but if we're going to address the disparity so that students aren't competing against other schools who have, double and triple the amount of schools they have, that's why the breakdown in Division I and II is structured that way. Is to eliminate that disparity or reduce the disparity as much as possible going through that process.
Thanks, Doug. So at this time, we'll actually go ahead and wrap up. Yeah,
Ronald, I think I did see a question that we didn't touch on, and that talked about, I think it was a question before that one maybe, that talked about previous success at schools and why that's like the California model, to which California is looking at possibly going away from, by the way. And when we talk to our member schools and our coaches associations and about that previous success, is you could have a really good class come through, or 2 really good classes in a row come through and do really well, and then have a few classes that are struggling a little bit, and we don't want to make those athletes somewhat pay for the success of students before them. And I think that's the biggest thing we've heard about past success. And so that being a single thing alone, addressing some competitive balance things, I don't really think has merit to do that. It could be part of a group and a part of a process with 2 or 3 other items in there. But I think we've heard that loud and clear as we've had some discussions out.
Yeah, and I might add, Doug, when we first started competitive balance, some of you probably weren't at your schools yet, but some of you may remember that was part of the formula, was the success factor. I think there were 4 total factors that were considered, and success was one of those. And we heard pretty loud and clear from a lot of our member schools that they didn't think that that was fair, and they thought that was quote unquote penalizing schools that did it the right way and had a great tradition and those type of things. I think it's fair to say you could probably argue using success, yay or nay. But based on the feedback we received from our schools years ago, it was decided to drop success as part of that formula.
Yeah, the other thing that hinges on that as well is any such adjustments would require the vote of the membership. So that's why it's, loud and clear from the membership and hasn't been brought up again. But at this point, we'll go ahead and wrap up. As I mentioned before, I turn it over to Doug for a closing statement. As I mentioned, this has been recorded. We'll go ahead and pull this and upload it by the end of the week so that you can disseminate to your stakeholders or rewatch at your leisure if you miss anything early in the morning with any school cancellations and all that good stuff. But we appreciate you taking the time to be on here, and we hope to see a majority of you at the road shows that Bob had talked about a little bit earlier on today. Again, that information will be sent out tomorrow in a memo so that you can look to work that into your schedule. So Doug, I'll turn it over to you for a closing statement.
Thank you, Ronald, and board members for joining us this morning, and then all of you, especially on a morning like that you've been faced with as a school administrator. I think Andy hit that exactly right, because I knew at that time you're going to be making a decision whether buses roll after your delay and some of those kind of things, and those aren't easy decisions. So we respect what you do to keep your kids safe, and thank you for all of you do to do that. So as Ronald had mentioned, we're going to come out and go around to different locations, and this does not replace our spring meeting when we talk about referendums. This is just designed for this purpose alone, and to share your thoughts. And I can assure you that anything brought to us will be part of the process, just like we've had since June moving forward. A lot of that's how we arrived at where we're at right now, is through a lot of input from folks and a lot of discussion. And so we're open to that. You can text me a question, email me, or invite you to those meetings to come and have a little bit more discussion about this. So thanks for your time this morning. Have a great day.